Did you just fart at the same time you burped?
No.
It sounded like you squeezed a fart out at the end.
What the fuck is the...
All right. Whose turn is it?
All right. Are we doing this? Is this the...
Yeah. Wait. Hardcover boys?
I mean, Joey for sure. Oh, what?
Oh,
Bro.
you soft cover little bitch.
No, honestly, 9 times out of 10 I would, but the price difference was like almost $15, and I was like,
Oh man.
like when I look at it from like 11 to 25, I'm like, that's just not smart.
I'll put the 14
Yeah.
in Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly, or some shit. So I was like, fuck it, let me just do it.
It's 11.5 today or something crazy.
Yeah, I don't know, something with like, I don't know, some news happened with like banking, I guess, or something.
Dude, if it go like, I feel like there's nothing stopping it going to 50K, and like that'd be sick that you own as much of a Bitcoin as you do.
That'd be tight, bro.
That'd be
I'd be
sick.
super happy. If it got to 5K, I promise you 100% I'd sell out. There's no doubt.
If it got to what?
If it got to, or did I say 5? I meant 50K.
Yeah.
If it got to 50K, I'd be out. I would be upset if it got to 100, but I would be happy. Right now, if tomorrow's at 50 grand, I would make like $40,000.
Literally. I mean, yeah, nuts.
Like, you kidding me? Like, fuck that. I got no other reason for owning this shit. Besides, I don't care about the decentralized currency. I'm just trying to make more USD.
Yeah.
It's a means to an end, bro. It's a means to an end. I'm not behind it philosophically. I'm just trying to make a buck over here.
Did you just fart at the same time you burped?
No.
It sounded like you squeezed a fart out at the end.
What the fuck is the...
All right. Whose turn is it?
Here's Shane. Sorry.
No.
And I'm not...
It's literally
5. Bro, this is the start of your category. You have to do the fucking intro, okay? I did the intro for my category. You're going to do the intro for your category. Talk it through. Give the overview of the book, why we chose it.
All
yada,
right.
yada, yada.
All right.
All right, Matthew McConaughey. Relax.
I'll take that as a compliment, I guess. All right.
Yeah.
You kind of look like a bum right now in the hoodie, long hair.
Dude, I don't give a fuck. You look like a bum with your scruffy ass beard. Shave once in a while. Jesus Christ.
You should
Your
see
your fucking hat is falling apart. It literally has shreds ripping and falling out of it. Just like,
I can't
all right.
wear a hat without Charlie destroying it.
Hello, everyone.
You think my beard is bad?
No, it's nice.
That's a good clip right there. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Books, Beer, and Banter. My name is Shane, and I'm here with Joe and Lucas, and we are starting a new book and a new series, actually, of books. So today we're reading The Black Swan by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. We actually read part 1, so is the epilogue, which turned out to be pretty long, and then part 1. The second book we're going to be reading in this series is Anti-Fragile, but also by Nassim Taleb. And this book, The Black Swan, is about the impacts of highly improbable events and how you can't really forecast for the potential impacts of these random events. Kind of like you could think pandemics, nuclear war, really big, improbable things that happen. And then in the next book, Anti-Fragile, it's all about how to live in a world that has these highly improbable events. And so we're getting started with part 1 of Black Swan. Joe and Lucas, what did you guys think?
I already know after the first section that this is a book that I both want to and I'm going to need to read again to like really grasp a lot of this information. Mm-hmm. I feel like there's times I was reading it, I'm like, I'm very surface level right now in my understanding.
Yeah.
And I almost wish I had more time and I wasn't like such an asshole and like put everything back where I could really like mull over. Cause like he's throwing like big gems out there at you and like little paragraphs. And it's like, I feel like he leaves a lot of and I don't know if maybe he's just like a smart guy or just kind of how he teaches, but I think he like gives you, and in a lot of cases, the main gist of it, and then kind of leaves it open to you to kind of like figure out the final mile, like type of thing, to kind of like put it into like your own perspective. But yeah, honestly, I enjoy reading it though. the whole 138 pages. It was fucking, or 34. It was good reads, and I like how he supplements it with stories and little anecdotes and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's kind of a
The
funny
made up
dude.
stories are funny. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's so different than Jared Diamond and what we had read.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Like I found myself like audibly laughing at some of the shit that he said. Like it's funny, and it's like it's not that it's a light read, but he makes it lighter than it would be, because otherwise it is kind of dense. Like he's throwing a lot at you, as Joey said. Like it probably will require a reread, and it is just like very dense. And the fact that like I feel like everything just kind of keeps rolling. Like although a chapter might end, or although like everything is in these like small little sections, they all like roll together very like fluidly. So I'm like, fuck, all right, the last sentence of that last like little section matters for the first sentence. The next one, I'm like, shit.
Yeah.
Like that was just a continuation of thought. And like for me in my head, when I'm like between chapters or like between things, I think of like, all right, thought break, come back. And this is like kind of rolls as if it's like a long fucking chapter, or like,
I feel like those sub-chapter headers are just like a different form of like a paragraph, like an indentation, you know what I mean? Like it should be the same.
It's like it would just distract me. I was like, fuck, I'm losing what happened before, and now I'm just like, oh, trained to be dull. Okay, what does that mean? And it's like it's just an interruption of what you're saying.
Yeah, honestly, I didn't even read the prologue until I was like 80 pages in. I'm like, this dude's been referencing the prologue like a couple times now.
Yeah.
I was like, it was pretty long, like, and that's why I didn't read it. And I was like, maybe I should go.
No, it's a meaty prologue.
Yeah. I was like, fuck it, I don't read the epilogues and books unless I'm super interested. I don't know if I'm gonna be interested in this book yet. Like, fuck them. I was like, oh wow, like I am kind of happy I read that. Like the whole like Plutonian or whatever the hell they called it, like Platoists or whatever. Like that dude description was in the prologue.
The second he said like, oh, as I described in the prologue, I was like, thank fuck I wasn't supposed to know that.
Yeah.
Prologue, and I was like, oh, this isn't like general knowledge. This is a word he made up.
Yeah. Like his words, like his coined terms like naive empiricism and things like that like he brings up. There's, what's funny is like I like the way one of the first things that I noticed from the prologue was like he deliberately says that he's writing this with stories and not using a bunch of factual data. So it's like he's almost writing it like Yuval wrote Sapiens. Like you can think about it like the comparison of like Sapiens versus Guns, Germs, and Steel. Like the narrative, basically like storytelling versus just like reciting facts over and over and over again. Because he says here like, note that I'm not relying in this book on the beastly method of collecting selective, quote unquote, corroborating evidence. For reasons I explain in chapter 5, I call this overload of examples naive empiricism, successions of anecdotes selected to fit a story that do not constitute evidence. Anyone looking for confirmation will find enough of it to deceive himself and no doubt his peers. So basically like, and then he says in that he's not going to reference a ton of different data, but he's just going to use logic and stories to really illustrate his points so that it's almost like obvious what it means. Like he doesn't need to reference the deep statistical ideas behind it. Like the stories illustrate the ideas enough.
Have you ever read any of like Dale Carnegie's stuff, or like even like the 4-Hour Work Week or like Miracle Morning? Like how to win people, all of that. It reads very similar to that. That it's very like, it's story driven, but it's the understanding that like data does lie behind it. But also the whole basis of this is like not to like over trust data, because what data is it's like this historical analysis that like doesn't always ring true. So it's like really interesting. So that's why it makes sense that it's like very story driven, because his whole thing is being like, it's like the anti-library.
Getting into the anti-library, I was like, God damn it. This is like just
library. This right here is the anti-library.
Yeah, right.
That's like 8 of them.
Meanwhile, I'm just reading books to put them on the shelf so I can show up. And he like starts the book with the fact that like unread books are more valuable than read ones in a library.
Why was that again?
Just because you have a library, like you have access to, it's like a research tool. Just like the more books you have, if you have an idea and you want to like read about it, you could go to your library and be like, oh, let me pull out the book about this by this person. Like you don't necessarily have to have read it.
My thought.
I feel like it wasn't like that.
I didn't interpret that way. I simply interpreted it that like if you're talking about like collectible books, ones that are unread and unopened are more like historically and monetarily more valuable.
That's funny
because it would be like, you know, like if you talk about shoes or if you talk about like baseball cards like Gary V, like all these things, like when they're like dead stock or when they're like tier like grade 10, like untouched basically, that's when they derive their most, like that's when they're most valuable. And it'd be the same thing with a book. Like
yeah, I don't know if I got like the financial valuable out of it. I think the way I was kind of thinking of it, and that's kind of why I asked, because I don't know if I was right or not, but you know, saying like unread books are worth more than read books, meaning that like you still maybe have like more to learn, or like the yearning to learn more, instead of having just, and of all this vast you know, like area of different subject matters. It's kind of like the vibe I was getting. It's like, oh, like you don't have a bookshelf filled with fucking books on like self-help and on like business and entrepreneurship. You know what I mean? It's like you have a wide array of unread books of like, it's almost like a humbling experience. Like, you know what I mean? Like you don't know everything. You have all these books on all this subject matter that you haven't gotten to. And when you want to be able to learn about it, then you do have access to it.
Now that you say that, I think you're totally right, because it also goes hand in hand with every point that he brought up in like the first half of the section with like cancer research, that when they do a scan, they scan like to the best degree that they can. But in theory, it's what they don't know that's like more dangerous than what they do know, because they can only do like a scan that, you know, let's say it sees like 1% of your cells, and in that 1%, they don't see cancer. But it's the 99% of your cells that like is really important to understand if there's cancer or not. So that's like the thing with like the unread books. It's like, what is the unknown? And the unknown is almost always more valuable than the known.
One thing he says here, he just says like the private library isn't an ego boosting appendage, but a research tool. Read books are far less valuable than unread ones. And yeah, he basically says like another line here that indeed, the more you know, the larger the rows of unread books. Let us call this collection of unread books an anti-library. And he's saying that a certain type of person values, like understands the limits of their own knowledge. Like he like continues on talking about it, but he said, let us call an anti-scholar someone who focuses on the unread books and makes an attempt not to treat his knowledge as a treasure or even a possession or even a self-esteem enhancement device, a skeptical empiricist. So he's saying like academics and like they think like, oh, I've read all these books, look at me, I'm so smart. And he's saying that like this anti-scholar, this skeptical empiricist is like, look at how much we don't know. Like even your books that you've read, like great, you have a bookshelf with read books, but like you've also, there's so much more that you haven't read. Like there's so much more that we don't know.
We're hopping off all over the fucking place, like right off the jump. But that thing you said, Lucas, about the like with the cancer cells and we find more value and like what didn't happen. Like that was one of like the points, and I'm gonna have to like search like the other ones that like made me realize like I need to reread this book, because I was like, I feel there's like, I was like, oh, like I need to explore that idea more, because it's like super interesting. It's like completely like I 0% think that way. And I'm just like, that could be like a game changer, or like, you know, it's something totally worth exploring more that I couldn't like just fucking reflect on in my frantic fucking reading to get the shit done, you know?
Yeah.
But something big here. This is
yeah.
Like,
go back to the this could change your shit, Joey. Go back to that. But yeah, so basically, so this whole book, not even just this first section, this whole book is basically going to be about like the role in uncertain events. Yeah. So we're not going to learn at all about how to deal with it until Anti-Fragile.
No. So this is basically just making the case that, hey, there's these really highly improbable events that make history and we can't predict them. So like he's just like saying like, look, all of this goes to say that, just proving the point that there are events that can't be forecasted. And he like makes fun of like Wall Street forecasters and people who try and predict the markets and things like that, and like analysts and things.
Yeah.
Basically he just goes through a ton of, I think what he, in this entire book, he just like goes through all of the different problems with like the naive empiricism, that as he calls it, like people who like try and model out the future off of for like highly random events without recognizing that they can't model these highly random events. Like you can't model them, but they won't accept that.
Past. And it's like there's this one quote that it says, "The studious examination of the past in the greatest of detail does not teach you much about the mind of history. It only gives you the illusion of understanding it." And I thought that was really like, you only understand it in the moment. And he keeps referring to that that diary or that memoir of the guy like throughout World War II, that at like from 1934 to 1941 he'd write like monthly or whatever as to what was going on. And only reading that memoir did he realize that like history is so different when you experience it in the shoes of someone actively experiencing it versus when you look back on it, because like that's when things seem obvious. But of course, like no one saw the beginning of World War I or the beginning of World War II. And he uses the governmental bonds as an example of that. That like, even though this like inevitable thing happened, if you looked at the financial markets, no one was short, or there was no like signs of fear in outbreak and war. It was the drop when it came to like governmental spending.
Yeah, which is like another point that these are highly improbable and that like you can't predict them because nobody predicted them, like nobody predicted that the war was going to break out. That was it.
I feel like I'm going to be left at the end of this book with like a giant, like I'm already feeling it already. Like, so what? You know what I mean? Like, like now what? Okay. I get it. You know what I mean? I read 130 pages and like, totally don't understand most of it, and I'm sure there's way more to go on throughout the remaining chapters, but I'm already craving like, okay, so this world is so fucking uncertain, there's a lot of risk, and like I get it, and you can't predict it, then it's like, then what? You know what I mean? It's like, what the fuck, bro? Then like, what's the point of it? Like even giving a shit then,
I think that I don't know, on that, like thinking about like where it's applicable, like he has this quote that he says like, "So I disagree with the followers of Marx and those of Adam Smith. The reason free markets work is because they allow people to be lucky, thanks to aggressive trial and error, not by giving rewards or quote unquote incentives for skill. The strategy is then to tinker as much as possible and try to collect as many black swan opportunities as you can." So the idea there is that it's like, 9 out of 10 businesses fail. So really the success comes from just trying 10 times. You know what I mean? Like you just try and you try and you try again. And in a free system, you're allowed to try and you're allowed to fail. And the more you keep trying, then eventually something will work. So it's like really the luck of making it in business is really just a matter of, or like these making it super successful is just like building 20 different companies, and like your likelihood of one of them blowing up is pretty significant. Like, I think a point is that
calculated risk in a way, like
you
understand the probability that like that growth does exist or that boom does exist, but it's not, it's, as you said, it's just trial and error. It's
you recognize the own limitations in your thinking, in your abilities. Like you're like, look, as good as I am, it's still just like I still have to get lucky. You know what I mean? Like I still need something to go my way for me to go that. Like Zuckerberg and like Bill Gates, they didn't wake up and be like, I'm going to be a billionaire, so let me try building a company. They were like, they just built stuff. And then it turned into like the guys who invented Google, like they literally just wrote an academic paper on how to do like search better. And that turned into Google, which is now like one of the most valuable companies in the world. Like there's no, like, it's hard to plan to become a billionaire, Can
I take that thought like on a deep tangent? Because it's something that I meant to bring up with you guys earlier, and it kind of fits this whole thing. And it also ties into the, like, what is it? Mediocristan and extremistan thing of those like realms of thought. But have you guys seen all over Instagram recently? Maybe it's just because like everyone I went to is like the most liberal person ever, which is, I mean, I am too. But the whole sharing of like why billionaires shouldn't exist slideshow.
Yeah.
Have you guys seen that everywhere?
No, I haven't.
I haven't seen that, but I've heard the same narrative.
But I follow about like 300 people on Instagram, and I've seen it maybe 50 times. It's this whole, you know what, while we're here, I'm just going to bring it up really quickly. Why billionaires shouldn't exist. Human brains are not evolved to understand large numbers. As a result, we tend to vastly underestimate how large 1 billion is. This may help. 1 million seconds, 11 days. 1 billion seconds, 32 days. The whole thing is incredibly
Well, one said days,
you know what's fucking absurd? You know what's so absurd about this whole thing that people don't realize? They're like, billionaires could solve every problem in the world.
This is the slide here. What you're about to get at, I bet.
No, all right. No, but yes. So look, even if you took all of Jeff Bezos's money, we spend three to four Jeff Bezoses every year on the military. So like, you can't solve that many problems with $100 billion.
Wait,
like,
absolutely. But I just also want to say, so like, to just show how clickbaity and annoying this thing is, this slide here says billionaires pay less in taxes than we do. And it's like, blah, blah, blah. This right here is a video of a Lamborghini, like driving under a ticketing, like one of like the arms in a toll booth. And like, that's the visual that they use to show that like billionaires, pay less. But the whole thing is super clickbaity. Anyway, to tie it directly to the book, I just thought it was funny because the whole like Extremistan versus, what is it?
Mediocreville or whatever it's called.
No, it's Mediocristan. And it's almost chimes to that point super similarly in the sense of everything that fits in like Mediocristan of like height and weight and like the things that are immediately available to you in your world that are observable by like humans, and almost like thinking again, like in the books that we recently read, like looking back 10,000 years, everything in their world is measured by like Mediocristan things. That's how their world operated. But now, because of like where we are with technology and everything, we live in like Extremistan. And it just kind of chimes to that point that like only recently have we gotten to the point where like wealth and all these things are at this like level that it's really, really, really hard to really like to wrap your head around it. And that is like how these Black Swan events exist, much more regularly than they did before in the sense of like earthquakes.
Yeah. I think that the hard thing that people don't realize though is that while like relatively speaking, the Vanderbilts, etc., were like more wealthy than Bezos, etc. Like in terms of their share of wealth of the US economy, like they owned the only railroad system and the only like oil production, the only steel like they were literally monopolies in the truest sense. So like it's weird, like there were always people kind of like this. But I guess like when your comparison is like they have hundreds of millions versus billions, I guess is different.
But the thing that I'm saying though, and it again oddly like it just so I mean I guess everything will tie back into the first series.
Yeah.
But he said like everything today, like all these social matters. So in the sense of like he uses like J.K. Rowling and like book sales and Jeff Bezos and whoever, Bill Gates and money or wealth. Like these are all social matters, but all social matters all like live in Extremistan. But these are all like recently generated, human-generated ideologies or instances because of the advancement of society. But I just thought it was really interesting. That whole like just Mediocristan versus Extremistan was like a simple way to put it in the sense of understanding like his example of, if you were to get 1,000 people and put them all in a row and like you find the like heaviest person on earth, like the heaviest person on earth, he would only up the average of the weight of those 1,000 people by like 0.6%. And that's like the most example ever. Whereas if you find, 1,000 people, whatever, with like, median income, not even just you choose 1,000 people randomly and you just so happen to pick Bill Gates, he would skew it by being 99.9% of that pie.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I guess that just leads to the argument and the understanding in my head of like, when you think of human terms, like, yes, we live in an advanced society, but like, yeah, in human terms, like that's hard to think of, hard to like wrap your head around that, like some can be so drastically outweighing the rest of, people.
It's all interesting. Well, that's like the whole thing. It's like, so like Bill Gates' wealth would be a black swan because it's, that extreme disproportionate kind of effects. Like I was thinking to myself, this is kind of out there and like, I don't think it really holds true anymore. But I was like, can you have black swans on like a local level? Like, could we have our own black swan? Like if I fucking, I didn't like my example was dumb, but I was like, if I just fucking killed both of you right now for no reason why, you know what I mean? Like, that's, you know what I mean? Like, unpredictable. Like, there was no like tension or reason to do it. The matter was extreme in our local setting. And I forgot what the third criteria was for the Black Swan, but it fit it. And I was like, could that be? And I honestly, I think on like the next page, he answered it as like why it couldn't be something like that.
I think it has to be like multiplicative, where like you could only kill us two, like reasonably speaking. You know what I mean? Like you could only kill us two, and then you would probably get arrested. You know, like in terms of like even in your local, like let's say we were in a town, you know what I mean, of like 10 people, like after 2 people, you would probably get arrested. You know what I mean? To be able to like kill it, like, or you, like, it has to be almost, the scale has to be like much larger than that. Almost like spreading in a pandemic, where it's like if someone like with COVID, if someone gets sick with COVID, you know, they could spread it to 50, 90, 100, 1,000 people. You know, that one person could be responsible for getting 1,000. The one person could be responsible for the entire pandemic that could kill hundreds of millions of people. Like that is the scale of like a Black Swan. You know,
well,
like
isn't one person like like there had to be one first sick person.
I don't know.
What I mean? There has to be the first person that did it, unless like a group of people got like infected all at once, like in some contained facility. But yeah, I don't know. I just feel like the more I think about it, and like the more it's like, oh, this shit's like so random, and like anything could happen. And like in the examples towards the end of the section where he was talking about the casino and how he was like, you know, the 4 times the casino lost the most money had nothing to do with gambling. It was like the loss, like the owner's daughter got kidnapped. They need to pay the ransom. A contractor got injured, and then like 2 other reasons. But he's like, yeah, like those weren't built into their models. And I was like, yeah, but no shit. You know what I mean? Like those were like, and I get that's the whole premise of like this.
Yeah, that's the whole point.
But like,
yeah,
there could be an infinite amount of those scenarios. So like, how do you model for that?
No, well, that's the thing is like you don't model. That's the whole point. Like you
so
literally
just accept?
don't model.
You just wait for it.
Well, so that's the idea, is that you save money. You know, it's like no one knew this pandemic was coming. Everybody's like, oh, how could Delta survive? It's like, well, Delta could have fucking saved some money over the last 45 years instead of not ever saving $1. You know what I mean? Like,
so it's all about being more conservative because we're more vulnerable.
It's also yes, and it's also about like,
that's underwhelming.
No, but it's not, because
no.
From like a financial perspective, it's incredibly smart, because what he's doing is he's making these, you know, with like X%, you know, like let's say sub 10% of like his portfolio. He's making these decisions that are extremely unlikely, and you know, in 99.5% of them, he'll lose all of the money that he put into those decisions. But in like 0.5, it's probably even less. It's probably like 99.9 to 0.1. But in that 0.1 that he gets right, everything else, those other 90% of his holdings, right, will be covered by that 0.1% gain.
I understand that, but I don't feel like that's groundbreaking. I was at the casino this weekend, and I was literally doing that. I was playing blackjack, and you have your main bet, and then you have a match the dealer.
No. But that's the thing. No, you can't make 4,000% in a game of blackjack. You can't make 45,000% return in a game of blackjack. There's a cap. So it's like you're limited, and you could actually model out a game of blackjack because there are caps and there's limits to the percentage gains that you could make. Whereas in the market, if you buy an options contract that's out of the money, et cetera, and it goes up 400% or 4,000% or something of that case, or it goes down, the stock value goes down 90%. Like there's
a game of blackjack
instances.
Yeah, a game of blackjack isn't scalable. And that goes to, I thought that whole point was super cool, because I never thought of that. Like finding a job that's scalable.
Yeah. Yeah, where he talks about where like you could trade, your time isn't tied exactly to
the amount of work
your output.
I had one note there, because he uses like a bread maker, because like a bread maker is directly tied to how much bread he can make based on people buy it. But another one is like a prostitute. A prostitute
yeah.
Because like it's their time, you know, an hour to hour. And I said, not anymore. OnlyFans is pretty scalable.
Yeah, OnlyFans is scalable.
I feel like prostitution is now a scalable living.
Yeah, one of the things sorry, Joey, like on your point, this is like literally getting into the next book, like the stuff that you're bringing up of like, okay, well that's kind of lame. Is like, all right, let's everybody be scared and like not do anything because there's these random events. But that's where anti-fragile, the whole idea behind anti-fragile is the idea that if something's anti-fragile, then it gains from uncertainty. So there's like fragile things with like a teacup. If the ground underneath it starts shaking and it falls, it'll break. You know what I mean? But also then there's like a plastic plate where if it shakes and it falls, then it won't break, but it's not going to get better. So something that gets better is like a hydra where like you cut off its head and two grow back. So like that random uncertainty where like with an options trade, for example, where it's like that uncertainty where like you don't know if you're going to win, but like if you win, you're going to fucking win huge, or you don't know if this company's going to go under, but if they go under, they're going completely under. That's where you place small bets and you could win in that uncertainty. And we were talking about like the trying out 100 different businesses. It's like, all right, well, you have $100,000, it's like venture capitalists. Like you have $1 million and you place $50,000 bets in companies. You know what I mean? And if one of those hits, you could make $300 million. Like
so this idea of the black swan is pretty closely tied to like business and finance and money and not really elsewhere like
no, it's just the fact that it's easy to see the effects in money.
That
yeah
but I also thought like the whole black swan events have always existed, but the whole social thing, they're now all the time. Versus like just because they're more existent now doesn't mean like earthquakes happen more often or tornado. I mean, barring like whatever is changing with the earth.
Yeah. Well, you could think of a black swan event as like a YouTuber getting canceled. You know what I mean? Like you don't know if like
isn't that canceled. Super localized though? Isn't that like what I was going back? How is that?
No, because it's like you're putting out content for years and years and years around the same thing, and then the narrative switches where like something you said 5 years ago, now you get canceled for and your income goes to zero. You know what I mean? And like your YouTube, like your whole career goes to zero. Like that's a highly improbable event that you should probably plan for. You know what I mean? Like that you should think about and be like, okay, well, I'm going to be like some of these, like, that there's a possibility, but it's, and often like who would have thought like the first person to ever get canceled, you know what I mean? Before it was like a thing that like now it's like you should expect that maybe that could happen to you. But back then it was like some extremely like, oh my God, my career was ruined because I said something shitty on the internet 5 years ago. Like that's a highly improbable event that's just like not exactly tied to money. Like your entire, like you're just not allowed to do anything. You know what I mean? Like it's not just simply dollar to dollar.
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm just going to need to, keep chugging through this book to kind of grasp it. This is why I said I need fucking to read through.
Yeah. He also has a better understanding of it because he's read it. So.
Well, yeah, I've read this. Like,
you've been able to like me and Joey are still like at the tip of the iceberg. Whereas like I'm very aligned with you, Joey, in the sense of like the bigger picture and like the.
Well, I still don't really understand it like that well. I just have read it a couple times. You know what I mean? Like I still feel like I probably am saying some things that aren't true. You know what I mean? Because some of the examples you bring up, like at a local level, I'm like, I don't even know. Like, what does constitute a black swan at that level?
Also, obviously any writer has like his inherent like biases, but I think some of his are like really funny because now who he is as a person, like he has this really I hate the word cutting edge, but like cutting edge investment firm that does all like uses these types of ideologies of like the black swan to differentiate themselves in the market. But then he talks about like lending bankers. And he so obviously has such a negative thought on like people who put their money into a fund and like make 0.2% a year, blah, blah, blah. But he just says like, traditionally, bankers of the lending variety have been pear-shaped, clean-shaven, and dressed in possibly the most comforting and boring manner in dark suits, white shirts, and red ties. Indeed, for their lending business, banks hire dull people and train them to be even more dull. But this is for show. It's like if they look conservative, blah, blah, blah. But he's just like, fucking shits on them. But it's again I always find it funny when like someone puts out an argument and puts out their stance, and then like at the same time just like fucking tears another industry down. Like he just destroyed that.
Well, that's where like in his last book that I haven't read, but called Skin in the Game, he talks about like there's a reason why he shits on people like that is because he's like they're actively harmful to society, and they put the risk, like in the 2008 financial crisis, like the bankers actively put the risk on the general public while taking all the gain, and that is the most like unethical thing you could do. And they used some of these like naive empirical modeling techniques to like cover it up and say like, oh, we could have never predicted this. And he's like, yeah, you could have. You're just an asshole. That's why he like shits on people.
Wait, also, there was one thing that he said. Fuck, I don't want to read this whole fucking thing. But like, there's this. I'm just gonna do it anyway because I thought it was really relevant today because I saw a video about it. He said one of the largest trading losses ever in history took place in almost the blink of an eye with no warning signal. And then it's like there's a little like footnote, and it says the main tragedy of the high impact, low probability event comes from the mismatch between the time taken to compensate someone and the time one needs to be comfortable that he is not making a bet against the rare event. Blah, blah, blah. Indeed, the tragedy of capitalism is that since the quality of the return is not observable from past data, owners of companies, namely shareholders, can be taken for a ride by the managers who show returns and cosmetic profitability, but in fact might be taking hidden risks. Yeah. I thought that was really interesting because Tesla, for their most recent earnings, did exactly that. Tesla has like a couple $100 billion, or a couple like tens or billions of dollars in like green credits, like governmental green credits. And they sold $400 million of those green credits to other companies because like shit like that can be like sold and bought interchangeably the same way that you can like if you're doing something for like a smaller carbon footprint. Like a lot of the places that say like they don't have a carbon footprint and it's like an oil company. It's like, no, they just are buying carbon, like, like energy, like green energy somewhere else to like make for their pollution. So it's the same thing exists in like green energy when you're making green cars. Like you get these tax credits that then can be sold interchangeably between companies. So Musk or Tesla sold like 400 million of them a couple of weeks before the quarter ended. So when they reported, they said they had like $180 million profitable quarter for the fourth time in a row to say like we had 4 profitable quarters in a row. But in reality, that quarter they had sold, 450 million in these credits, and they're not a profitable company because they're cars yet, but like they did exactly that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. But something like that is
and then so they're taking hidden risks, which is what he has a problem with, which is like these they'll say like, oh, we're so profitable, but on the backside they're taking massive risks where tomorrow they could blow up and be zero.
It wouldn't be a black swan because I think there's enough arrows pointing towards it, and it is public knowledge that Elon Musk or Tesla did that. But like it is like a pseudo black swan event of like if Tesla tomorrow opened at $50 instead of $1,600 because of like these hidden risks that the company for the shareholders without them really
or if Tesla has I don't know, like they blow up because of this and they hold some patent like solar technology and now the world can't use solar. Like that would be like the black swan. Like that's like there was a section over here, and I remember I think we were talking about it once a while ago. I'm like he didn't go like on like second order effects and third order effects and how like those impacts. I think it was like the silent evidence section of it, or maybe not, but on how those impacts people don't realize or even necessarily think about, but those are also causes of these black swans. And I think that's something that was like another point like that, and like the negative kind of thinking that I was talking about earlier. Like that was like another one where it's like that type of shit is like I would love to get, I don't know, like better at is that I would love to think in a more critical and like, developed way, like second order effects, third order effects. I mean, listen, I'm not shy. I'll say it. I'm a very emotional person. Okay. I'm first order effects only before I make my decisions, it's what happens in the here and now is what fucking matters. But, that's just like a whole nother thing that's like when talking, like a lot of this like boils down to is like people's inability to think, and like he talks about it in that like system 1, system 2, thinking and whatnot, and like how most people are in system 1, and even if they think they're in system 2, like their logical thinking, they're really just in system 1, like they can't get over there. Like a lot of this shit just like boils down to like that, the inability to critically, critically think or look beyond. But like it all goes to like those biases. Like I know he went over a couple of them, but it's just like it's crazy that those are like huge cruxes on like human beings' lives. Like it's fucking wild that like these are filters that we see the world that like distort it almost. It's like we're not living in like the real world because of these tendencies that we have to create stories and, to more easily memorize information. And then we distort those and like, and like that's the God's honest truth. That shit. I mean, I started like doubting everything, I thought I could remember. And like I need to read the book to like tell you that like your stories change over time. That was just like a known fact. But like, I don't know, just like reading this so far is like also made me like, I don't say like uncomfortable, but it's just like, wow, there's like us humans are pretty fucking ignorant. You know what I mean? And like, I'm like, well, I guess it's like comforting in a sense that like, these CEOs and like a lot of people he calls out are like just as blind as me, but it's also very discomforting knowing that. I'm like,
knowing that like you could have been that guy. Yeah.
It's like shitty being like, okay, we're on the same pedestal. Like I could have been you, vice versa. But it's like, I've come to accept that I'm not, and you're in this position of power and leadership. But I'm like, we're the same person. That shouldn't be.
Like what is surface level, and in reality, like this level of thinking is so fucking, there's so much more to think about.
Yeah, that's why I want the fucking prescription.
I think it's super. The exact point that you're talking about is super fucking relevant with what's going on today and what's going on with like COVID. That right now, like, I think that this next week, we are on the crux of like those second and tertiary changes that weren't expected. And I think like that, I mean, not that it's like, again, I don't want to like overuse the Black Swan event, but so the end of this month, right? The next 2 days is the end of like the CARES Act and the, extended employment. In 6 weeks, all those people who've been paying their rent and living and surviving with 14 million people on, without jobs, they're no longer going to have the same livelihood that they've had the past 4 months because of that, because of the like unemployment benefits. What's going to happen there? And then another one, I don't know if I spoke to you guys about this, but like what was it? It's like something about the value of a college degree is going to be so undermined because like if it can just be taught online and I don't remember the exact thing. Someone brought, it's this. So this girl I was with last weekend, one of my buddy's girlfriends, she's like a kindergarten teacher. And she's saying like, let's say COVID continues for a while, you're going to have like pre-K kids or kindergartners or first graders missing out on like incredibly like fundamental and influential socialization early in their life. There's going to be COVID babies in 20 years that are
going to be like
to interact in the social.
Yeah, it's like only child syndrome.
COVID incels. Like the COVID incels is going to be the label.
They said it's going to be like only child syndrome, but everyone, because all these kids never grew up learning how to interact with people. But like that is something like, how do you predict that? Because there isn't a model for that.
Well, that's the second and third order effects of.
That's exactly what I'm saying, though. Is right now we're in the crux. I think, and I brought this up too with my dad, and I'm sorry to keep cutting you off, Shane.
No, you're fine.
I was able to right now hold off on the apartment search market. So like for anyone watching, I'm actively looking to move into an apartment in New York City starting September 1st. This is 2020. I don't know when you're watching this. Maybe it's 2025. It's in the middle of COVID. If you remember what that was, you probably will.
If we're still alive.
We're still,
if there's anybody out there.
We haven't degraded to tyranny yet.
Anyway, that being said, my dad and I had this conversation, and I also had this conversation with Amy, my coworker. They're both like in their 60s, whatever, that if I could hold out instead of finding an apartment on September 1st for an apartment in like mid-October, when all of these benefits end and when people actually are starting to, fail on like not make their rent payments and people are going to have to like start really getting like really cutting prices because they need to fill vacancies. Like if I could hold out for 6 weeks after September 1st, that's when the rental market, at least in New York City and a lot of like major TMAs or major cities, is going to be like the best for renters because there's tens, if not
Well,
hundreds.
also,
Until another black
I mean,
swan happens in the other direction,
no,
and rent goes up exorbitantly. You know, like that's what I'm getting at. There's the realm of anything. You know what I mean? Like, like okay, like the black swan's gonna make it go down. The blac swan's gonna make it go up. Black swan's
you want to make it
sideways.
even more complicated? Is that like so? If you think about it, the pandemics under his definition are not black swans, they're gray swans, because we know they happen every like 100 years or so. Like it's not unpredictable. Like you should know that a pandemic's going to happen eventually, and most likely like it could be really bad, it could not be so bad, but like there will be a pandemic that's really bad eventually. So like in his definition, it's not technically a black swan. But now what is a black swan is what's kind of crazy is that we know that pandemics are going to come, but nobody could have predicted how poorly the U.S. would have handled the fucking pandemic and how terribly we've done with it. And so now we don't even know. I mean, if like the CARES Act is ending, if we put forward another bill of stimulus into the economy, which maybe we need because of how poorly we've handled it, we are at the potential of like completely debasing the value of the dollar by just printing. We're already, the dollar's down like 8% or something. So like we're on the verge of a collapse of the US dollar, which is a true black swan in the sense that literally the value of the dollar could go down 20 to 40% against global markets where you can't no longer buy anything. So like that could very well happen as a result of us being so bad at mishandling a pandemic.
It's literally, I mean, not saying Nassim Taleb should run the country, but I saw this statistic.
You're in one section, bro.
I know, right?
No, but it's so strictly aligns with everything that he's saying, and it's existed in the U.S. You know, there's always been someone that is focused in the White House on epidemics, but I saw another fucking like bullshit viral post saying like in order to counteract the like extreme like what has happened with COVID and like how to stop pandemics at this level of spread, it would take like $22 billion a year of research and investment and legislation to go through and just certain things to really stop something like this from ever happening again. And like if we had done that, and that's like I think 3% of the annual budget for the military. But again, it's using that 3% of the military budget, that $22 billion, which sounds exorbitant, but like, what would that have saved in US GDP and like economic growth this year alone? Like probably trillions of dollars. That again, $22 billion over the past 50 years, over the past 10 years, like, that's $100 billion, but it saved 10 trillion. Like that's the black swan, like investing method.
Yeah.
But also
sacrifice a little to like hedge your bets against the big.
That's all it is. And now the fucked up thing is we're talking about human life, which is, in theory, and like that.
Well, then you'll have some idiot in government be like, we've been paying this $22 billion for 20 years and there's never been a pandemic. And then they're going to defund it and then there's going to be a pandemic. Like,
well, I wonder
that's literally like,
why hasn't it happened? Oh, maybe because we've been spending that $22 billion a year.
Dude, I love
so many things like that.
Well, so he has this line literally about the same topic, but like this line, I just have to read it because it's so funny. He's like, I know this is a lunacy, but basically he's saying like he has this example of like this thought experiment. So like, what if someone knew that, essentially that the World Trade Center, like 9/11 was going to happen. And the day before they had the idea to put like locks on the pilot doors, something like that. Like there would have never been an incident. Like if he stopped everything, was like, everybody has to put locks on the doors. Like this is the number one thing we have to do. The day before, it would have cost a lot of money and he would have been thankless. Everybody would have been like, this idiot. We've never had anyone break into a plane to take it over. But like he reads this one line in this whole line of thinking. He goes, I know this is lunacy, but it's just a thought experiment. Parentheses. I am aware that there may be no such thing as a legislator with intellect, courage, vision, and perseverance. This is the point of the thought experiment.
He drops dimes like that. He
But dude,
drops dimes.
that's shit like that. I don't know. That's what I'm saying. Like he's really funny. Like another thing was like, people talk. I don't know. He was saying like about listening to music, and he was saying how like I would rather have like this guy Vladimir Horowitz on, and he's like now extremely dead. Like that was his phrasing. Who is now extremely dead, and I just feel like he has all these like little clever things. Like that's less backhanded, but I don't know.
Yeah.
He's a very enjoyable. Like I feel like he's shameless in what he's saying.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like refreshing.
You know what it is? He sounds like a fucking, just like a dude. Like, Seamus is the best way to put it. Like a dude who's had like a couple beers and he's just like shooting it straight with like a little humor. You know what I mean? He's like telling you his like fucking point of view. And he's like holding back slightly, but like still letting some shit like slide out, you know?
All right. Well, there's this section, the chapter 6 called the narrative fallacy, which I think it was like super interesting to think about, like talking about things that you could actually use to like try and interrogate your own thinking. And like, if you're committing the narrative fallacy, he says the narrative fallacy addresses our limited ability to look at sequences of facts without weaving an explanation into them, or equivalently forcing a logical link, an arrow of relationship upon them. Explanations bind facts together. They make them all the more easily remembered. They help them make more sense. Where this propensity can go wrong is when it increases our impression of understanding. So he's saying that like we weave a story into like everything that we think we know. And then by weaving a story into it, we think we know it better than we actually do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like, I forget what it's called. I think it begins with like a P. It's like when they want to help you memorize like information, you create stories around it, like not phonetic.
No, it's photo.
Oh.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Like the way that people remember pi is like they see it in colors and shapes.
Yeah, exactly. So like I feel like that is like, at least what I'm getting from this is like, okay, you know what I mean? But it's like when you create that story and then like assume it means something more than just 3.14159, blah, 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 blah. Like that's when you get into trouble. You know what I mean? Is like what he's saying is like when those stories, make us feel like we understand instead of just realize. I guess it is the core of it. And that's one of those things I want to talk about, that is like these like biases and these fallacies and whatnot. It's like understanding them is something that is like an actionable takeaway that I feel like can just, at the bare minimum, like expand your reasoning and your not your intuition, but like you're just like your comprehension of information. And like it's more of like a not stoic by any means, but like you're just looking at the information and like it is what it is type of approach though. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Without putting your own emotional kind of twist on it, being like, oh no, like instead of like X, Y, and Z being X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z means that like 1, 2, 3 is happening or happened or blah. It's like, no, dude, that's like, it doesn't cause anything. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Like now you're like making facts out of like thin
you're trying to reduce this like big thing into like one little story that you can tell yourself. Like all of these, like, hey, it's like the guns, germs, and steel. It's like, it's essentially, while it is a very good argument, it is essentially a narrative that he weaved with very good points. It's like, but he's reducing the complexity of the last why, like all of the things that have happened across the world over the last 10,000 years to say, like, here is the story of why, like, South America didn't conquer Europe, which, like, it's important, but you have to, like, look for where you think that like, just because that's true, like, just because it's a good story and it makes sense and it's good, like, but you can't overestimate your knowledge based on that story. Like, you can't pretend that you can predict the future because you saw the past.
Yeah, but like it is such a, I feel like, helpful thing. You know what I mean? Like to a certain extent, like being able to weave these stories, weave data or information into a story.
It's also like what you're saying, and I agree. Like the idea of being able to, step back and think from like a more like objective place is super helpful. And it's like, yeah, like that's a great like thing to step away, like a takeaway from this book, right? Trying to look at things more objectively and like I don't, it's not data driven because like that's the whole like counterpoint to his book or like to his point, but it's just like really trying to understand like, you know, this means this and this means this without like tying emotions or a story into it. But if you think about it, like that's how the human brain works. Like that's just how we're coded.
Yeah.
Like there's a reason why when we walk around outside, like we have our peripheral vision and we know like when to cross the street, and we're not like, you know, if your pupils were always dilated and everything was in focus, there would be too much data to comprehend. You know what I mean? Like we have
Yeah, I believe that.
to narrow our field of vision and of thought and trust our like internal, you know, in this sense. And I'm talking about like just crossing a street that, you know, cars are coming from this way because it's a one-way street. And like, you know that, and you look that way, and, you know, you do that because your brain only has so much power to like think. And I feel like we do that with everything, with any thought. It's like we have to rely on those internal biases. Otherwise, your brain is just going to be in overdrive all the time.
Yeah, well, most of the time they're good.
Most
of the time they're good, but it's when you try and say like, when you like model, like it's using basically the narrative fallacy. I think for me is like when you try and take this complex, like, hey, what is the estimate, when you try to estimate the death rate of COVID fucking 2 months ago, and you say like, oh, here is the model that I've created, like you weave this narrative, well, like here's why I did this and why I picked this number and that number, and it comes here and they combine and they cross over, and like this is why I think it's going to be 2 million. And it's like, by reducing this complexity down to a story, you're like, you're not just doing it to like better try and have a little bit of a better understanding, you're like actively making you're pretending you know more about the world than you do, and it will drive you to make the wrong decisions. You know, that's where like I think it can go really wrong.
I agree, but I'm just saying to act that way is decoding the human brain, because that's just how humans interact. Like we're all judgment and bias driven because we don't have the brain power and computational power to always be like logical and think with everything, you know, forward.
No.
So,
Yeah.
but I agree. It's learning how to slow down and how to break things down and not be narrative driven in that case. I'm just saying, I think it's interesting that like, it's how to teach yourself. It's just a decoding of the brain of your thought, like how to slow down and think in a different way, which is like so fucking like so much easier said than done. It's such a
Oh my God. Well, it's like saying, think differently than like you being you, me being me. Like we think because of who we are, you know? So it's like, now think as if you weren't you, you know? Like in a completely different way.
Like if someone turn to me and be like, be less anxious. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, great.
Cool.
yeah, totally, dude. You know?
Yeah, I think, no, you go.
I had nothing. I was probably going to say 4 words.
So I think like what I want to take us maybe on like a little bit of a tangent, but I think like what we're talking about here and like learning these different ways of like viewing the world to make better decisions. Like I've always like, you always hear like, you know, how important decision making is, and like understanding like decision making frameworks, and like trying to like mental models, whatever it is, like trying to like understand how to make better decisions. And I think for like a long time, I never thought that decision making really had that big of like, I never thought it was that big of an impact. But like I'm starting to realize that like he talked about with choosing a career, etc., like actually being able to step back and think about these different things, like the narrative fallacy, like where am I reducing complexity to tell myself a story when like, you know, the reality is a lot more complex. Like where am I kind of overlooking the reality of things that I don't understand, or trying to say that I know more, like breaking that down. And also thinking about the different biases, like where am I being biased, but like, and just thinking about black swans, you know what I mean? Like this whole idea, like using these kind of ideas to like make decisions, I'm starting to realize is like the most, like in terms of like being successful or like having a good life or whatever, I feel like making good decisions determines like very much the quality of your life. You know, and like I think like Lucas, you're in a position right now where you're making a very serious decision around like moving. You know what I mean? Like going to New York, and like making that decision. Like you could stay in Boston, you could move to New York, or you could move somewhere else. You know what I mean? Like there are so many other options. That's not just like A or B, but like actually stepping back, and like these decisions that we make have a big impact on our life. Well, you know what I mean?
It's really, I think it's so interesting that you say that, because this whole, like, what I've read so far makes me think of like how billionaires are billionaires and how these people are where they are. Like when you think of people who have like almost benefited from the Black Swan type of event. And so much of it is the active decision making and playing an active role in your own life. And like on a daily, hourly, minute basis, these people are making decisions. And it's like these can be small or big decisions, but like a lot of times like I can be complacent and not make a decision. But it's like by making these decisions, you're opening more and more doors. And like when people say like, oh yeah, like I got to this place because of luck. Like he said it at one point, like the job that he landed is because of like the guy saying like, look for something that is scalable, blah, blah. Like it was luck that he had that conversation. It was luck that he got. But like those things happen because you're a decision-making person. And like, it's just going exactly what you're saying. Like when you make decisions, the more decisions you make, the more of a chance that you have one that fucking launches you like that, you know, like really rockets. And I feel like that's why people are uber successful. And like you have these people who are like, oh yeah, it was just like, you know, good timing and like a good work ethic. But in reality, it's like, no, like they were just making decisions all the time, like taking risks, making decisions. I think those are tied together really tightly.
Yeah. Well, and you think about like, or it just puts you on the path. Like there's so many different converging paths where like you could have with every split second, you're going down a different essentially fork in the road, or maybe even it's like 5 different directions. And by actively choosing, like I'm at a fork in the road right now, and I know that I'm going to really take the time to think about this. Like, do I take this job? Do I take on this client? Do I move here? Do I do, you know, like if you actively think about that, you can actually like put yourself on that path, you know, that may lead to that big thing.
You know, it's really funny. I had a talk with my men's group on Monday, and they were like, someone was talking about meditation, and it was so accurate that like when I was meditating every day for like the 6 or 7 months that I did daily, you get to a point where you're so, or I did at least, I'm not saying it's like a universal thing, but he shared the same thought that like you're so present in your mind that you notice every fork in the road in your decision process. Like you're so present in the moment. And I think that's why it's such a helpful thing for like anxiety, depression, whatever, for anything that you're doing, like why all these successful people do meditate frequently. And it's because it's like, you are recognizing those decisions on a minute to minute, you know, second to second basis.
Well, you have the ability to.
But exactly.
Yeah, like you know, yeah.
What the fuck am I doing? Like
you're just on a passive ride at that point.
Yeah,
you're not,
system A all the way.
But also, it's like if you think about it, like I mean, I guess depending on like how large the decisions like we're talking about, but like up until a few years ago, like I can't think of any major decisions that I've had to make that would have like severely impacted my life. Like some one-off ones, like more negative ones, like should I should I steal from this candy shack? Like that's like a decision that like, I made like a 15-year-old. But it's like I feel like
I think you're underestimating things.
Like moving, taking a job, like those are all
Well, that's what I was thinking. I was like going to a specific college, taking a job outside
leaving
of college.
leaving Verizon or not.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's 3. Yeah, but like, okay, we named 4 big decisions I made in the 26 years I've been living.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Fucking hard.
No, exactly. But though, yeah, they're big decisions. Though.
No, I know. I'm not saying they're not. Like what I was saying was like it's easier. I feel like it's easier for people that make big decisions all the time to like make decisions where it's like us, like me, you know what I mean? Like it's just more unfamiliar. So like,
well, what do you spend your time doing as a decision? Like, are you going to take the CXL course?
I know that's why I was saying to the degree else, you know? What, you know what I mean? Like, did I get out of bed at 5 or 5:15? Like, that's a decision. Like, how far down do we want to go? Like, to what's
I think the minutia you could waste a lot. You could burn a lot of calories just thinking through small decisions like that.
Your exact point is like, you know, people who make these big decisions are good at making decisions. You know, people who play Call of Duty are good at playing Call of Duty. People who play, you know, a professional sport are good at playing professional sport. And it's because they just do it over and over. And it's how to get comfortable making those decisions.
Yeah. Like
also like
changing decisions.
How do you expose yourself to it is the hardest thing for me.
Well, I mean, at a minimum, there's like, how do you structure your day? Like there's the decision of like every day you have a choice of like, what do you spend your time on?
Yeah.
Like, of course you have work, or maybe you can quit your job. I don't know. Like you have a decision every single day of how you spend your your day, and you can decide like how you want to spend it. And nobody's going to say, look, you could be like, I'm going to be ultra productive and I'm going to freaking read for 2 hours in the morning. I'm going to work. I'm going to get home and I'm going to learn programming and I'm going to learn a second language and I'm going to freaking just like nonstop do that. But like, Lucas, you were talking about like recently you were playing Call of Duty with like one of Malik's friends, and he got you that, like, it didn't become something, but he got you that job interview out of a random, just like you were playing Call of Duty together. So you really don't always know what is going to actually lead to the thing. You know what I mean? So it's hard in that sense too. Like, there's random shit. Like,
but making decisions does almost induce more serendipitous kind of fucking opportunity. Yeah. I mean, without making those, you know, then it's
being more social. You could just say, hey, I'm going to spend time with more people, you know, it's like a Call of Duty or not, you know?
Joey, it's just really funny hearing you say exactly what you just said about, like, in 26 years, you've had 4 big decisions. And, like, I sit with that every day. And, like, I think right now is so clear that that is the case because I am, like, losing sleep and probably losing hair and, like, fucking losing my mind over this move.
Because it's super stressful, to which it might not be to somebody else.
Exactly. You know? But, like, and that's just someone who's more comfortable in a big decision-making process and time.
Or someone who just doesn't think about it. Someone who hasn't considered that it's a big decision.
Yeah. But it's funny because, like, Joey says that and it just fucking hits the nail on the head of, like, everything that I'm struggling with. It's like,
you're like, yes.
Recognized to a T that I'm in that crux of, like, one of those 4 decisions that I've made in my life.
Well,
and,
dude,
like, I didn't know that
you're about to make a fifth of the big decisions you've ever made in your life.
But, like,
and you're going to read a book about decision making.
And how it's all uncertain.
If I didn't think of it before, you know, if this, like, all just happened, like, was happenstance or whatever, it had happened, and then I looked back on it and I was like, oh, that was one of the biggest decisions I ever made. Like, moving to Boston, it wasn't, like, as stressful because, like, it just kind of happened. I was like, oh, I love this girl, like, let me do it, whatever. But looking back on that, that was just a huge decision that, like, I fucking closed my eyes and jumped in the deep end.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's, like, a bit more deliberate, and I'm, like, fucking losing my mind. And I'm like, God.
Yeah. Dude, I mean, I had to make this decision about moving to where I'm going to move in 2 months. Thinking about nice pit sweat. So, like, the reason is that New York, like the baseline logic is, like, New York is a lot more expensive than a lot of cities. And for me, right now, the idea of having that financial pressure on me puts me in an extremely, like, talking about this, like, fragile position where, like, I could, like, something could go wrong with client work, etc., and, like, I could not be able to make rent and just be, like, completely fucked. Whereas in Portland, it's so cheap that I could have a bigger, cozier apartment and have a lot freer headspace to really just be able to do things and not really worry about the financial side of things. And, like, even with, I mean, I've mentioned this to probably both of you that, like, when I was in St. Pete, like, I was, after reading this stuff and reading especially, like, Anti-Fragile, like the book after, like, fantasized about the idea of just, like, working part-time at, like, a coffee shop to cover rent and just have, like, brainless, like, 20 hours, just, like, leave it at work kind of thing. And then the other amount of time, just spend it all on, like, trying to start startups or build products or, like, launch companies, you know, like, literally taking this line of thinking, like, you just place those bets and you try again, but you have this, like, stable, easy, calm thing. For, like, he talks about authors, like, most authors will be like, they're a waitress or whatever, and then they're an author. But, like, in Anti-Fragile, he actually, like, comes back and says, like, that's a good way to go about it. You know, like, you put those bets out and maybe you'll become fucking J.K. Rowling. You know what I mean? Or maybe you won't.
I was gonna say, because I feel like he was making fun of them.
No, he was, but that's where he talks about, like, I think in maybe Anti-Fragile, but just the idea that, like, having this calm, chill job where you can then spend all of your other time with completely, like, free head taking those big bets, you know, whether it's a startup or a book or.
I also think that, like, some people, like, you know, you are having this realization at 25. I think he might have had this realization at 13. Like, when, or whatever he said when he read that book about, like, 1941 about, like, World War II as it was rolling out and understanding like, history is very different when you look back on it versus when you're in it at the moment. And, like, he had this realization, this grasp on, like, oh shit, I have the power now. And, like, because of his circumstance, like, when he was living in, like, what is now Lebanon, and, like, there were bombings happening every day, like, he was just in his basement reading and doing exactly what you're saying, that, like, he didn't have to worry about paying rent. He didn't have to worry about, like, you know, and all he did was just read. and like found his niche and like went with that. But it's like some people discover it at 10 and figure it out and have, you know, it's like figuring out what your risk tolerance is. And some people figure it out before they even have, before risk tolerance exists because they're still like living with their parents. And then some people don't figure it out at all. But it's just, I feel like you're lucky to even have that thought now. And like, I think
also I'm lucky to be in the position where I can even do that, like make that decision. You know what I mean? Like oftentimes you just can't. Yeah. And like, you know, I don't know. It's like these books have like driven my thought process around that a lot. And I feel like from having read them, like I feel better off, even though like, it's not like I'm fucking crushing it right now. You know what I mean? But like, I feel like
you're crushing it.
I feel like better off than having not read them, like using like you're talking about, like these decisions come up and you start just thinking about like what, like Taleb, you're like, what would Taleb do? You know what I mean? I feel like that's a helpful, like, you know, like what would Jesus do? What would Taleb do? Like you kind of go through the person by person. I think it's like super useful.
So in the, you know, the comment section or in the, you know, the subject of this video, we'll have our Amazon affiliate link to a WWNTD. What would Nassim Taleb do?
Yeah.
No, it's NNT, bro.
Oh, yeah,
Nassim Nicholas.
What would NNT do?
Sorry.
You want to hear something funny? This fucking dude. Do you guys notice that he said that twice in like the last section, like the last like maybe 20-ish pages? Like he abbreviated his name as if he was talking with somebody. But the first time he just said NNT and then like whatever. Like it wasn't in like a fucking like a prose kind of format. And like it wasn't like a conversation, like a dialect. And I was like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
And then like pages later, he said like NNT parentheses like myself. I'm like, did you know people weren't gonna fucking get the first time around? Like, what did you purposely like? Why did you leave that out? Like, if you felt the need to say it the second time, why didn't you say it the first time?
Based on the story of that fucking Russian author, it has to be the case that he did that on purpose.
Yeah, right. Wait, which Russian author?
Like in like the early first chapter, he was like this.
He made up the story about the Russian.
Oh, Yuvalan, or the one with the Y.
Yeah. And like her whole thing about like writing this book that no one cared about. Yeah. So I feel like he definitely is super aware of this shit and likes to like keep his readers on his toes.
Dude, that's like a whole nother thing. After reading that section and like going through it, I'm like, I don't want to read something, think something, and then him to be like, oh yeah, like I'm sure you thought this. And I'm like, I've been like a lot more conscious, but like it's like not like I don't know if it's like helping me or like because I'm like also I'm like it's more of just like don't get duped. I'm not like really just like understand it. I'm like, watch out, like read second meanings in between the lines and shit. But I'm like, I don't know, you read the book, so like I don't know if it happens or not, but like I feel like it is. And like I just want to be fully aware for that. I'm like, fuck you, Taleb. Like you're not getting me on this.
So for anyone watching, clearly this book sparks some interesting conversations that take us many minutes away from anything that was read on the page. So,
well, it's because it's all philosophical, though, opposed to like being like facts, like evolution.
So if you are at all concerned as to why we have digressed so much, just pick up this fucking book and join us in our conversations. We're here. You know?
I can't say for certain, but I think it's going to be a great book.
Yeah, no, it really sparks a lot of really interesting thoughts, and again, like even early on, hearing your perspectives on certain things made me rethink how I read it. Like Joey, the whole thing with like the value of a book, and like it completely unlocked the way that I saw how he meant it. Way more enjoyable than our last book.
Oh yeah, it's like back to Sapien style storytelling. Like I think we have to stick with. I think we have to like weed out because like I think Guns, Germs, and Steel really like lowered the energy levels for us and like really took a little bit of the like. Took a little steam out of us. I don't
want to be that negative about a book, you know? I want to come in and be, like, equipped to fucking...
Dude, I listened to the last, like, Joey, that when you asked me to look up that recording for the last episode of Guns, Germs, and Steel, and it was, like, literally I opened it up, and it's, like, Lucas being like, yeah, this fucking book this section just sucked. And I was cracking.
Like, oh wow! I think
he was like, he could have written this fucking book in 6 chapters, but it was 400 pages. And I'm like, yeah, no, I totally get it. I think like sticking with books that are, I don't know, I think we could have like a little like check at the beginning, like books that are enticing to read.
Anyway, any last comments?
I don't know. I don't like. I feel like we talked a
literally
lot
talked
about
the
a lot.
first
But, like,
30
do we know
pages.
anything? Yeah. Like,
Well, that's a great thing. Like that puts us on a good track for this book.
yeah. So moving forward, I think that this section kind of highlighted. I mean, the whole book's gonna highlight why black swans happen and like their like ramifications. But I think this first part was really like the core, like as close to as like biological and like psychological reasons as to why. Like we have our like biases, which is like a psychological thing. Like even like he was saying the dopamine, how dopamine is triggered in some instances where like pattern recognition happens, which like makes us more comfortable and want to see patterns. You know what I mean? Like it's like a fucking like those dogs that are trained to drool when they see food. It's like, oh, word pattern. This is gonna feel good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Let me simplify this shit over here.
Yeah.
So like, I think like
more. Yeah.
Yeah. So I what's the next section? Is it prediction? What like he said something in like the last sentence about like prediction.
It's called. It says we just can't predict.
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's about how we can't predict these black swan events. So he's like setting us up for like all the reasons why there are black swans and whatnot, and like our biases that make us. I think like what you're saying is like why we always get fucked by them.
Yeah,
like,
why we're susceptible to the swan.
Yeah, why we never handle them correctly ever.
Yeah. Well, he said that. I mean, that was like the huge thing too. And sorry to interrupt you, but it was just like we always, you know, and I think Lucas talked about it in the beginning. But it's like when you see something in hindsight, it's way more clear as to happen. So it's less like, oh, we were fucking hit out the blue, you know? It's like, imagine right now, like imagine you're at like a bar and some dude just fucking clocks you in the, like sucker punches you in the back of the head. Like that was completely random. Then, you know, you wake up in the hospital, you're like, what happened? Oh, well, you know, I went to the bathroom, I looked at this chick, and then, like, maybe I was, like, flirting with the wrong person, or, like, oh, yeah, it totally makes sense why I got fucking hit, dude, because I was fucking being a dick and flirting with some chick, or something like that, where, like, that could have not been the reason whatsoever.
I walked to the bartender and, like, elbow, like, you know, shouldered my way.
Yeah, I tripped and nudged somebody, that was it, like, this guy's an asshole. It's like, no, you're making assumptions over here now.
But also, it's really interesting on that note that for so many things like that, for so many of those little decisions and those actions, there, you know, we don't have someone walking around with notes, like following us on each step. So you'll never know to such a large degree shit like that. So it's really interesting that so many
whatever your assumption is actually what's true in a sense.
Like, yeah, but to such a crazy degree about like the world in general.
Yeah. And like, and it's, like only your assumption, only what you remember. So whatever was digested the easiest is what is even going to be an option for you to assume was the fucking thing.
And our memory fails, and then we can't actually remember things. So it's like
you're also going to be biased about yourself. So you're going to be like, "Oh, this guy's just a dick," versus like,
"I would never."
Our memories are all like lies, and then we can barely remember the lies, so we like could distort them even more.
I mean, that's
God.
Dude, he was saying like people fucking, and like this isn't the first time I've heard this, but like people will like make up like sexual abuse stories as a kid just because they were told so many times, like, you know, in like a court that's like dragged out over like years, like you were molested, like, or like John molested you, you know what I mean? Like like talking to the defendant and people like, you know what? Yeah, you did, you know? Like, how crazy you could fucking make up.
Yeah,
and not make up. You could believe that you were, like, sexually abused when you weren't. Like, that's a powerful thing. Not in the right direction, but that's a powerful fucking thing right there that could just happen, you know?
Yeah.
Wild.
No, it's crazy.
Wild. We're, all right, we're reading 135 to 210 in this next section. Part 2.
Oh, nice, dude. 80 pages?
Yeah, fucking nice, easy.